really just write that into my script?
If there are any sounds that have truly stood the test of time, they are the rhythms which at one time flowed from the minds of classical composers like Bach, Tchaikovsky, and Dvorak. Like any other modern medium of entertainment, these compositions have made their way into video games with varying degrees of wit. To honor the legacy of many of the most influential individuals in the field of music, I'm going to count down 10 classical musical references, be they auditory or visual, in video games. Before I begin, I need to clarify a few rules. First, I'm going by the contemporary definition of classical music, which encompasses the Baroque era to the Romantic era, which is about 1600 AD to 1910. Second, because a good number of these involve music, the play before put rule is null. And finally, if you know of any references I may have missed, please mention them in the comments, as I'd love to hear about them. With all that aside, shall we begin? We start this list off with a bit of an obscure choice, that being a PS2 game by the name of Samurai Legend Musashi. I can't really say much, seeing as I've only played the prequel to this game, but I can tell you it has a great soundtrack. One song in particular stands out, that being Scarlet Rage. This song does just that by being one of the few in the soundtrack to use an organ. But let me ask you this, does this rhythm sound familiar? Stumped? Well, if that's the case, I can't say I don't blame you. Unless you've heard Toccata and Fugue in D minor at a relative time to Scarlet Rage, the resemblance isn't easy to pick up on. Now, with that in mind, let's make a better comparison. I'm well aware that Toccata and Fugue has been used in many other games, especially the Final Fantasy series, but the reason why Scarlet Rage gets on this list instead is because the subtle organ reference is unexpected, even for this series' varied selection of music. You would expect a subtle nod to Bach in a game like Final Fantasy VI, but not so much for a game named Samurai Legend Musashi. At the same time though, this subtlety is a double-edged sword that keeps this reference at the very bottom of the list. You typically wouldn't immediately recognize it, and that means the reference is only doing half of its job. Here's something you're bound to hear me say quite a bit. Dynamite Headdy is a very strange game, and on many occasions it seems to relish in its colorful insanity. Nearly every boss battle in this game plays this straight, especially the Keymasters. Case in point, the very first Keymaster, Mad Dog. The game really goes nuts for its first major boss battle, seeing as it begins with Headdy and Trouble Bruin getting ready for a rematch, but nope! Headdy has to fight a giant and possibly robotic balloon dog puppet instead. As the fight begins, the seemingly static orchestra begins playing in the background, and by the lack of logic this game operates on, they begin playing Tchaikovsky's Nutcracker March. The track really converts to the Sega Genesis sound font quite well, and in some strange way it really does suit the battle with Mad Dog. The battle itself, provided you're not a speedrunner, is actually well paced, and most average runs I have of it are done before or within the time it takes to listen to one loop of the Nutcracker March. The problem with this formula though, and what keeps it low on the list, is that the incoherency of everything going on in this fight prevents an otherwise interesting reference from accomplishing much else. It may be fine by Dynamite Headdy's standards of quirkiness, but as a reference to classical music, it's lacking a good quality to be as memorable as the other ones that comprise this list. A music-centered list like this wouldn't feel as complete by overlooking rhythm games, and when looking for classical music references, an interesting example occurs with Rhythm Thief and the Emperor's Treasure, where the protagonist, Raphael, meets a young girl named Marie and her caretaker, Jean-Francois. After proceeding in the story a bit, Marie runs off in tears and Jean-Francois asks for Raphael to look for her. Marie ends up getting kidnapped by Napoleon, and as Raphael saves her, Jean-Francois reveals himself to be a turncoat, nearly kills Raphael, and hands the dragon crown to Napoleon. Soon enough, a duel between Phantom R and Jean-Francois becomes inevitable, and the latter, piloting a large knight-looking mech, begins firing projectiles that Phantom R must deflect. As the minigame goes on and as the two exchange some pretty hilarious lines, your ears are treated to an incredible church organ and rock guitar remix of Bach's so-called Little Fugue in G minor, that solidifies the memorability of this match. However, the minigame itself isn't that difficult, and if anything, this moment is remembered mostly for the remix. Sure, it's a recognizable classical music reference, but it really doesn't build off of the other components as well as others on this list, and that keeps it right where it is. Let's talk about a game in the Mario series that a lot of people tend to forget about. Any guesses? No, not quite. No. Keep trying. Oh, sweet Lord Hideyoshi, no! Get that away from... I was referring to Dance Dance Revolution Mario Mix. Now, several fans of the Mario franchise know that whenever you began a game of Mario Bros, you would hear the first 5 seconds of Mozart's Eine kleine Nachtmusik, Movement 1. And Dance Dance Revolution Mario Mix goes a step further with this reference. I am referring to the song Underground Mozart, which not only begins with a sound effect from Mario Bros, but contains remix pieces from the entirety of Eine kleine Nachtmusik. Of course, given the game this track is in, it's not the longest song on the list, and the stage where it plays doesn't even resemble Mario Bros, so there is a bit of missed opportunity to this reference. But that's not the end of the segment. Dance Dance Revolution Mario Mix contains another song based on the works of Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, that being Pipe Pop. Pipe Pop, while not quite an obvious reference as Underground Mozart, is also a remix of a well-known Mozart song, in this case, the Turkish March. The two of these songs are both based on two of my favorite Mozart compositions, and given that they're both some pretty solid remixes, it should come as no surprise they're two of my favorite songs in a game that does deserve a bit of extra attention. A+ to Nintendo for showing some love to Mozart. Speaking of whom... oh, heck yes, Fatal Theory 2. Going through arcade mode and getting ready to face the final boss, Wolfgang Krauser. You see what you did there, SNK. His name's Wolfgang and he's from Germany. That's real cute. Let's move on to the fight then. Wow, this stage's architecture is a bit baroque. Wait a second. SNK, you clever bandicoots, you! Yes, if Wolfgang Krauser's name, nationality, and stage weren't enough, he has his personal orchestra playing Mozart's Die Irae from his Requiem in D minor during the fight. SNK couldn't have picked a better piece to match this fight. The intensity of Die Irae goes perfectly with Krauser and his fighting style. I mean, really, he's capable of overwhelming you with brute strength alone, and even if you try to keep your distance, Krauser has a few projectile attacks up his sleeves. Beating Krauser is a satisfying feeling, as it seems like his sheer strength and personal orchestra attempt to visually and audibly intimidate you. The visuals, music, and overall atmosphere of this one fight make it memorable not only as a good final boss, but also as an excellent example of effectively utilizing classical music to convey a certain mood to accompany the gameplay. Speaking of... Disney's Fantasia introduced many to Mussorgsky and Rimsky-Korsakov's magnum opus, Night on a Bald Mountain, as the theme for Chernobog, who, despite having a name that means Black God, was depicted as being closer to the devil than anything else. Of course, with a massive being that probably terrified a lot of kids way back when, it would have been a shame on Square Enix's part to pass up the opportunity to include Chernobog as a boss in Kingdom Hearts. But they didn't just avoid missing that opportunity, they made a challenging boss battle out of it. In the original Kingdom Hearts, not quite the case in Dream Drop Distance though. Chernobog's attacks may be limited, but they're quite potent, and the intensity of Night on a Bald Mountain suits this all perfectly, whereas the slower version featured for Chernobog's reappearance in Dream Drop Distance better suits the lessened difficulty and switching gameplay. Both of these battles use the song and play with its tempo to fit the battle almost flawlessly, and the visuals do well in going hand to hand with both Fantasia and their respective covers of Night on a Bald Mountain. What's interesting to note though is that Night on a Bald Mountain only plays in the North American version of the game, with the Japanese version of the original Kingdom Hearts using the standard Disney boss theme for Chernobog. Huh. For once the West didn't get the short end of the content stick! Pop quiz. Have you ever heard of the Mozart effect? Well, if you haven't, it's the theory that listening to classical music produces short-term improvements in cognitive function. Aside from the obvious choice of Tetris, another puzzle game that implements this well, and better if I might add, is Catherine. During the nightmare stages of Catherine, you must climb up a tower of blocks and move quickly to avoid the collapsing structures. Blocks with additional effects add to the strategy, and this is further emphasized during the boss stages, which adds yet another task of dodging attacks into the mix. Given that the songs that play in these stages are remixes of classical music, the Mozart effect can become something of a subliminal concentration aid. These just aren't any remixes though. Composer Shoji Meguro made these covers to sound like songs from the Persona series, and given the atmosphere of Catherine, it all comes together brilliantly. To have the music get into your mind and initially help you focus, only to further hammer in the game's horror-esque presentation and atmosphere, it's a dual-natured aspect only Atlus can do and do well. The Mother series is well known for its numerous musical references, yet a notable nod to the classical genre is absent in both Mother and Earthbound. However, this was not only corrected in Mother 3, but made up for in spades with the first boss of Chapter 2, Mr. Passion. Mr. Passion already has a unique concept, being a composer reincarnated as a poltergeist, and that his battle themes are named in a very romantic manner. But what easily makes this fight memorable is the fact that his theme is a medley of classical music stretching across the timeline. But that's not the end of it. In Chapter 5, Mr. Passion, under the new moniker of Lord Passion, appears as an optional boss. While the battle itself is relatively unchanged, the music that plays during the rematch is a different medley of classical music. However, I didn't place Sweet Lord Mr. Passion on this list for the music alone. Most people don't take note of his appearance in both battles. Mr. Passion, with his classic black outfit, dignified cravat, and curled white hair, bears a striking resemblance to Johann Sebastian Bach. Lord Passion, on the other hand, with the new red coat and extra hair curls, looks a little more Amadeus, if you get what I mean. No matter, both of these battles are good, and the visual nods to classical composers, coupled with the expected musical reference, make for one of the most memorable boss battles in the Mother series. In Asura's Wrath, you play as the demigod Asura, who seeks revenge after the murder of his wife and kidnapping of his daughter. Among the guardian generals on his hit list is his own mentor, August. Prior to their duel, they enjoy a moment in a hot spring over some sake in true Auld Lang Syne fashion, and all the while a relaxing rendition of Dvorak's Symphony from the New World's second movement plays in the background. As calm and well-paced as this rendition is, it's not the only reference with August. As episode 11 starts, the duel between student and mentor begins. The relaxing version of the second movement gives way to the sheer orchestral brilliance of the fourth, as Asura and August have their duel on the moon. While this sounds like an odd setup, it all makes sense considering that, and I bet you didn't know this, Neil Armstrong brought a recording of the Symphony from the New World with him on the Apollo 11 moon landing. Don't take that real-life connection as the only positive quality of this duel, though. Capcom couldn't have picked a better song to match up with the visual festival for the eyes going on during this entire battle. The symphony accompanies a duel that escalates from a simple fistfight to August using his katana to fight and later impale Asura, and continuing by thrusting him into the Earth's surface, where Asura breaks the blade and kills August with the remains of his own sword. There's just a certain je ne sais quoi to the choice of music and how it matches up with the crescendo of action as the fight goes on, making it a memorable symphony for the ears, eyes, and mind. Even if you haven't played Asura's Wrath, the duel with August is one of the most recognizable moments, and rightfully so, as I can't think of two better interpretations of Dvorak's Symphony from the New World. Now before we reach the end of this list, let's recap. Number 10, Scarlet Rage from Samurai Legend Musashi. Number 9, The Battle with Mad Dog from Dynamite Headdy. Number 8, En Garde Jean-François from Rhythm Thief and the Emperor's Treasure. Number 7, Underground Mozart and Pipe Pop from Dance Dance Revolution Mario Mix. Number 6, The Final Battle with Wolfgang Krauser from Fatal Fury 2. Number 5, Chernobog from Kingdom Hearts. Number 4, The Nightmare Stages of Catherine. Number 3, Mr. Passion and Lord Passion from Mother 3. And number 2, The Duel with August from Asura's Wrath. So what do I consider my favorite reference to classical music in a video game? Let's just find out, shall we? I hate to sound just a bit cheesy here, but if you've been paying attention to this list, you may have noticed that every other entry on this list was just a singular reference or a recurring pattern of references. How exactly would you top this? It's not like there's an entire game that happens to be a big reference to classical music, is there? There indeed is. Allow me to introduce you to Eternal Sonata. Eternal Sonata takes everything these previous references put on the table and fashions an entire game out of it. Essentially, the entire game takes place within the subconscious of a dying Frédéric Chopin, and Chopin himself appears as a party member. Featuring a soundtrack laden with Chopin compositions, along with musical terminology galore, Eternal Sonata really pulls you into its world. Aside from Chopin appearing in person and the whole game taking place on his deathbed, Eternal Sonata also shows a great deal of respect to the poet of the piano by educating the player on the life of Chopin between chapters. Now, I don't want to go too in detail with this game's story, despite it being on the short and linear side, as it is something I would rather let you all experience, but it throws in some surprisingly deep themes throughout. Combine all that I've mentioned so far with a Tales-esque combat system that uses a turn-based system and a light and dark gameplay mechanic to encourage strategy, locales that easily show off what the PS3 and Xbox 360 are capable of rendering, and a cast of characters that are not only likable, but have flaws that make them seem more realistic. Everything about this game, from its beautiful dreamlike landscapes to Motoi Sakuraba's excellently made original tracks blending well with numerous Chopin compositions, and the fact that the game teaches you about the life of the composer as accurately as possible, make it a game that truly deserves more love. This game is a love letter letter to not only Chopin's musical works, but also to his entire life. I'm the Kitsune Hawk, and this is why I think Eternal Sonata is the greatest reference to classical music so far in the medium of video games. I guess you just can't handle some of my puns. I'll take my hat and end the video now.